that introduces the period 4. Remember, there are 9 periods in this course. We're starting period 4. So let's get started with Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is basically the presidencies of Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe, and all the things that go with that. Okay? So, Chapter 8, Jeffersonianism and the Era of Good Feelings. Okay? Just the first part is just a quick recap. Okay? So, the election of 1800. Maybe write down a couple of things like, Adams loses. That means the Federalists lose. Thomas Jefferson wins. That means the Democratic Republicans win. Okay, just something very basic. That's just, that. Now, the Revolution of 1800, that's another recap. Remember, this is a peaceful transition of power from one party to another. And remember, which group lost power in the executive branch in Congress, and which group gained the power? Federalists lost, Democratic Republicans won. Okay? All right, so let's do a quick recap of Jefferson's political views. He favored what type of government? Strong state governments. He promoted an agrarian. Agrarian's a fancy way of saying agricultural. Okay? And he wanted to undo many misspelled it, Federalist policies, okay, like strong national military, the Bank of the United States, the excise tax on whiskey, the Sedition Acts, lots of things, okay. All right. Okay, so think about this, what we're going to focus on today. To what extent did Jefferson's administration, his presidency, when I talk about administration, and ideologies maintain continuity, meaning stay the same, or foster change, meaning change, pertaining to politics and economics from 1787, when he was a member of the cabinet for Washington, to 1812, which is a couple years after he's president. Okay, again, we talked about this Revolution of 1800. Look at that map. That is what is America at that time in that light yellow color. Remember, up top, that's the Northwest Territory. Remember all that? Okay, just pointing out that Thomas Jefferson won and all that good stuff. Okay, also pointing out, because of that revolution, you can see 67 Democratic Republicans will dominate the House. And they also will have the majority in the Senate. All right, so who is Thomas Jefferson? Okay, he is from Virginia. That is his state, his colony. He is a planter. Okay, so he is wealthy. He has slaves. Okay, and let's talk about this as a statesman. Okay, he was a member, of the House of Burgesses. He was participated heavily in the Second Continental Congress as his contribution, Committee of 5, writing the Declaration of Independence. He was governor of Virginia. He then will be the minister to France early on. He will come back and immediately serve as Washington's Secretary of State, where he will battle it out with Hamilton and form political parties. He will be John Adams' vice president, and then he will be the 3rd president of the United States. Okay, what is his party? The Democratic Republican Party. And again, it was established in response to, they wanted to oppose Hamilton's Federalist policies, like having a national bank, the whole neutrality thing and helping out England, or, choosing not to help France is basically picking England, you know what I'm saying? And so he wants to undo a lot of those things when he is president, okay? He's also the one who got the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions drafted and approved, which you remember that nullifies the Alien and Sedition Acts. And this is important. This has actually been on the AP exam. When he is inaugurated, he knows that things were, he knew things were tense. The Federalists lost, okay? He could have easily just been like, hey, Federalists, suck it, I'm the winner kind of thing, okay? He decided to take the high road Good job, because he is our president. And this is a very famous quote. He says at his inauguration, which first of all, he actually walked in the inaugural parade. He didn't ride a carriage. That's him representing that common man approach of the Democratic Republicans. He says, every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists, meaning even though we have different platforms, it's still promoting democracy. We are all Federalists. We are all Republicans, meaning we are all still true to the American roots of democracy. Kind of just saying, hey, remember, we are all one. Okay? And he is a Renaissance man. Okay, so this spot right here says Jefferson's background. For political background, you don't have to write anything down. You know it. Okay? Now, in this little caption for Jefferson, I want you to do something like, I want to undo Federalist stuff. Okay, something about the Revolution of 1800. He's going to try to undo things, and he will undo some things. Okay? Now let's talk about the personal stuff. Remember I told you, okay, first thing, if you look here, it looks like a mini podium. He was an inventor. He loved to invent. He definitely is a Renaissance man. He had a huge library, loved reading, so much so that he would sit at his study, his office, and he would read a book like what you see there. And when he was ready to kind of change it up, he would just turn me a little like a lazy Susan, and the next book was already where it left off. And that's what he loved to read. Interesting fact, eventually he will die and he's in debt. And so his estate will basically give his library to the government, and that is what establishes what is now called the Library of Congress. It started with Jefferson's libraries or books, and if you go to the Library of Congress, you can actually see Jefferson's library. It's in glass, but it's cool. You can actually see his copy of like The American Crisis and Common Sense by Thomas Paine. It's pretty cool. Okay. Also, he is an architect. That is his mansion, Monticello. And you can tell it's from that like neoclassical French and also like Roman design that's pretty cool. And then here's where we get to Sally Hemings, okay? Sally Hemings was a slave, okay? And Annette Gordon-Reed, who is a historian, came up with something called the Hemings of Monticello, okay? Which talks about the relationship Thomas Jefferson allegedly had with Sally Hemings, okay? So let's explain first off. You look at this little family tree, okay? Look at John Wells and Martha Epps at the top, and then John Wells and Elizabeth Hemings, okay? What that means is this John Wells guy was married to Martha Epps, but then had a mistress who was Elizabeth Hemings. Elizabeth Hemings was a slave, okay? Now, continue down. John Wells and Martha Epps had a child named Martha Wells, okay? So Martha Wells is the daughter, okay? Who does Martha Wells marry? She will marry Thomas Jefferson, okay? What happens is that they will have some kids, Martha Wells Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and there'll be complications with childbirth, and Martha Washington will die from complications with childbirth. And on her deathbed, she says, Thomas, please promise me that you will not remarry, okay? Thomas Jefferson says, I will not remarry, okay? And Martha Wells Washington dies, okay? So now Thomas Jefferson is lonely. He promised he wouldn't remarry. However, you can see just from what happened with Martha Wells' father, unfortunately, having a slave mistress, if you will, was very common with plantation owners. And Thomas Jefferson was no different, okay? So Thomas Jefferson will take Sally Hemings. This is before the relationship. Do you remember how he's the minister to France? When he is in France, he brings Sally Hemings and a couple other slaves, almost like servants. In France is where Sally Hemings and like Thomas Jefferson start a relationship. Now in France, slavery is over, okay? Now he's asked to go back to America and be Secretary of State for Washington. And he realizes that Sally technically could stay in France because slavery does not exist. So she could be like, hey, I'm out, I'm free, I'm in the free area, okay? And Thomas Jefferson gives her a proposition that she agrees to. He basically says, if you come back with me to America, to Monticello, I will make sure that all your children, or let's say this, all our children will gradually get their freedom. And as a mother, she chose to go back to Virginia so her children would eventually be free from slavery. Okay, but here's the kicker, what people don't understand. It's like, whoa, okay. Sally Hemings was Thomas Jefferson's half-sister. The dad was the same. So that's a nice little interesting thing, okay? And, you know, you will see that eventually, remember James Callender, we talked about him with the Sedition Act in that video you watched. He gets mad because he basically took one for the team for Jefferson and did not get a, like he went to jail for publishing bad things about President John Adams. Well, now he's out of jail and he was promised a job if Jefferson like got the presidency. Well, he did. And Callender's ready. I want to be the postmaster general. And Jefferson's like, sorry, not going to happen. Now Callender's going to retaliate. And he's the one who starts publishing cartoons and accusations that Thomas Jefferson has a slave relationship with Sally Hemings, a slave. Okay. And what Jefferson does, he doesn't even address it. When people say, hey, what's going on? He just ignores it. Like he just will ignore the question. Like if you're asking me a question right now and I go like this. Okay. So he never addresses it. But to this day, supposedly the historian worked with someone who did DNA on some African-American descendants. And supposedly there's Thomas Jefferson's DNA, you know, is there. So there's definitely a lot of evidence that supports he had a relationship. So that's just like an interesting thing there. Okay, so now let's talk about Jefferson's revolution. So do we pay off the national debt? No, it's $10 million. But hey, remember, it was $75 million. So now it's down to $10 million. And the thing is, what is Jefferson going to do with that? Is he going to, you know, whatever, okay? And so his Secretary of the Treasury is a guy named Albert Gallatin. There's something called the Gallatin Plan, okay? And they're going to try to, get rid of the debt. That's the goal, is in it, like, they're going to reduce the spending of the federal government. So hopefully there will not be a debt. Now, it gets smaller, but the debt never goes away. Okay, I just want to put that. But that is proof he's trying to shrink that federal spending, which was more of a federalist thing. Okay, and so he will reduce the size of the Army and the Navy. Again, it's all about money. If it's smaller, that means less ships and less money. Okay, and he wants a balanced budget. That's the blank right there. Meaning the money coming in is the same and definitely not more than the money we're actually spending. Okay. So remember, Democratic Republicans want to try to reduce the debt, reduce the power. So he does live up, in terms of Revolution of 1800, he definitely reduces the spending, reduces the size of the Navy and the Army, okay? And then I want to point out, he does get the excise tax repealed. So that's another example. But what is one thing that he chooses not to fight, and he chooses to continue? That national bank. Because remember, that national bank had a 20-year charter. He could make a stink, but what's going to really change? It's just not worth the battle. He basically said it's going to expire in a couple of years. Just let it continue. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the Barbary pirates. Okay. You're thinking, what are the Barbary pirates? Oh, hold on. Okay, so think North Africa, okay, also is known as Tripoli. Don't worry about that. We'll go through that in a second. Okay, so the Barbary Wars, and you see they're in parentheses, okay? What's happening? Some background information. During John Adams' presidency, these North African pirates, okay, and the government in these North African countries support this, okay? This is government-sponsored or government-approved pirates. Basically just taking U.S. ships, okay? It's just a group of pirates from North Africa, okay? John Adams was paying a bribe to prevent this. Every year, there would be a bribe that the U.S. government would have to pay. Remember, I told you, Gallatin, Secretary of the Treasury, and Jefferson, they were looking through all the expenses, and they're like, this big old load of money, where's this coming from? And then they realized we were paying this money to prevent people from being a pirate to our ships. He's like, no, we got to attack that head on. We can't spend that money every year. That makes us like, so you won't attack me? That's like appeasement, and we're paying someone, okay? And, you know, the bribe was 120 grand, okay? So we were paying 120 grand every year. And Thomas Jefferson finds this because, again, he's trying to have a balanced budget. He says, oh, heck no. And what does he do? He basically says, we're not going to pay it. And guess what? I'm going to order a naval squadron, meaning a group of, you know, U.S. naval ships, to go to Tripoli, North Africa. Now, did Congress declare war? No. That's why it's he ordered, as commander-in-chief, he ordered people, but you see, some people might think that's stretching his powers. Congress could declare war. He sent a naval squadron and just to see what happens, and there will be some fighting. You can see this picture right here. It's like a drawing of the Barbary pirates. And then down here, this is actually a drawing of the American Navy, like setting up headquarters, if you will, on the Barbary coast. So he sends the Navy to do something about it. Like we gotta head on, like almost like a social Darwinism. Like if we want to stop, we got to attack, and if we win, we get to call the shots. Okay, and what's going to happen, okay, is after some skirmishes and some fighting, Tripoli will agree to a peace settlement, okay? So with this blank right here, let's see. Should Jefferson pay the tribute or go to war? Solution, go to, and I'm going to put in parentheses, war. Because did he declare war? No. Did Congress declare war? No. He just made it happen, okay? So in 1805, the unofficial war will officially end. That we signed with Tripoli. And we basically said in 1805, we will pay $60,000. But that's once and that's it. Meaning, so that in a way, he kind of stretched the power he wasn't supposed to have, but it worked out to our advantage because we only had to pay half that yearly tribute, and we only had to pay it once. After that, the Tripoli pirates said, we're not going to do it anymore. Okay? All right, so now we're going to talk about Jefferson and the Supreme Court. Okay? This is something you definitely should be familiar with. Okay? I want to point out that not a single Democratic Republican sat on the federal judiciary, like Supreme Court, when Jefferson came into office. Okay, why? Washington and Adams, they're the ones who appoint people, and they appointed Federalists. Okay, so Adams' Secretary of State was a guy named John Marshall. He is now the new Chief Justice, and you better know that guy's name. He will be the Supreme Court Chief Justice for over 30 years. Okay, the election of 1800, who was the loser? In this case, we're talking about John Adams. He knows that in March of 1801, he's out. And he's a sore loser. And the Federalists are a sore loser, okay? So what they're going to do is they're going to pass something called the Judiciary Act of 1801. Remember, the Federalists, technically, they control Congress, but they know that starting with the new session, they will not. So they're trying to almost stack the deck, if you will, to hurt the Democratic Republicans in this revolution of 1800. So Congress, led by the Federalists, will sign into law the Judiciary Act of 1801. This reduces the Supreme Court down to just 5 spots. And then this part's more important. It adds more federal judges. So 16 new justices. Now, not in the Supreme Court, in the federal court system. And again, how do you become a federal judge? The president has to appoint you. So now that Congress has signed off on this 1801 Judiciary Act, now it's John Adams' job to appoint as many people as possible and make sure they're all Federalists. And then Congress, the Senate, will approve, hopefully, all those Federalists. And then it's going to be a nightmare, hopefully. That's the plan for Jefferson. Okay? Because, they don't see eye to eye. All right, so that's the plan right there. And why would Jefferson be angry with this act? Because the Supreme Court and federal judges will declare or could declare his actions unconstitutional. Because again, if they're Federalists, they have a loose interpretation of the Constitution. Jefferson supposedly has a strict interpretation. Okay, so that's some background information. On the backside, on Adams' last day in office, he appoints a Federalist, William Marbury. We call him a midnight judge because it was so last minute. We're talking, it's March 1801. Jefferson's about to be inaugurated. And John Adams is like, I got one spot left. Let me appoint him. Okay, now I'm waiting on Congress to approve it. Okay, you approve it. And to make things official, okay, it's all about a paper trail and documentation. You have to have, okay, a writ of mandamus, which is basically a certificate that says you've been appointed by the president, the Senate approves you, you are now officially in writing, you got the certificate, a judge for the federal government. Okay, and whose job is it to deliver this writ of mandamus, this certificate? The Secretary of State. Well, the Secretary of State's a little preoccupied. He's about to be the Chief Justice. Okay, so what happens is that Marbury gets appointed and approved last day in office, but the certificate never got to him. Okay, so now, a couple days in, Jefferson's president, and William Marbury says, I need my writ of mandamus, I need my certificate. Okay, Jefferson says, the president and Congress and the Secretary of State should have done that all before. Now, it's void. Because if you have no paper trail, sorry, I can't give it to you. And again, is Thomas Jefferson going to say, hey, James Madison, my Secretary of State, give him that writ of mandamus? No, he's going to say, you're going to play dirty Federalist? I'm going to play dirty. I'm not going to give him, I'm not going to order him to, my Secretary of State to give him that writ of mandamus. So Marbury goes to the Supreme Court, okay, because he says that okay, so what did William Marbury do? He sues for his writ of mandamus, which is that certificate. Okay, he sues, and this is important because in the Judiciary Act of 1789, it says the Supreme Court can enforce the delivery of a writ of mandamus. Okay, so again, if you're William Marbury, I get it. He goes, look, it says in this prior law, 1789, the one that has created the system, it also said that the Supreme Court can enforce the issuing of a writ of mandamus. So Supreme Court will enforce the issue of my certificate. Okay, John Marshall looks at this law and he reviews it. This is called judicial review, where the Supreme Court looks at the Constitution and looks at the law and says the Supreme Court has made its decision. Okay, they can interpret. They have the power to interpret the law as final authority. And what John Marshall says is the Supreme Court cannot enforce. Which branch enforces? Executive branch. Okay, so will William Marbury get his judgeship? No. The first law the Supreme Court declares unconstitutional is the Judiciary Act of 1789. So let me just clarify. The Judiciary Act of 1801 is like background information on how Marbury gets appointed, but not his writ of mandamus. Okay, the Judiciary Act of 1789 is declared unconstitutional because the Supreme Court says the only branch in charge of enforcing things is the executive branch. So that part of the law that says the Supreme Court can enforce the delivering of that certificate, that writ of mandamus, is actually unconstitutional. Okay, and so for number one, this blank right here, it's so important, judicial review. Okay, this basically, the Supreme Court has had the power, but sometimes you just got to explicitly state it. This court case is what officially proclaims what the Supreme Court's power is. Okay, it says it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. Okay, Thomas Jefferson's actually pretty pissed at this. You would think, why? Marbury didn't get his judgeship. No, He's pissed because his cousin, John Marshall, basically just said the Supreme Court has the authority to determine what the law is and declare things constitutional or not. So he's like, I'm president, but I do not like the Supreme Court, like making sure I know what their powers are. Okay. So long story short, Judiciary Act of 1789, first law declared unconstitutional. What do you call that power of the Supreme Court to look at a law or action and declare and interpret it and see if it's constitutional or not? Judicial review. Okay. Okay. And really the last thing we got to talk about is the Democratic Republicans are mad. And so they're going to try to take it out on the Federalists. Okay. And they're going to try to use impeachment as a political weapon. And that's it for right now. Y'all have a great weekend.
All riders and drivers may be dismissed at this time. I will also let you know when we dismiss bus riders.